Welcome back to Fast Market here on the Schwab Network. It's time for cash tags. For that, let's bring in our next guest. That's going to be Megan Brantley. She's the VP of Research at Likefolio. Welcome back to the show, Megan.
Thanks for having me. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday to you. Looking forward to this long weekend. And you know what? Google Alphabet investors are having a nice time here in the month of August. It's quietly rallied to all-time highs. It's kind of out of the spotlight now. There was always this concern that they were going to lose a bunch of their search business to agents, AI agents. That hasn't taken place. It continued to perform pretty well. Department of Justice breathing down their neck. They might have to divest parts of their business, but this one keeps chugging along. Do you have the data that backs that up?
Yeah, right now it seems like on our end, investors are really betting on Google's strength in cloud and AI. And we do have some exposure here. We do have some insights when it comes to that cloud infrastructure. And when we look at our data, at least in terms of web visits, we actually have Google Cloud gaining the most market share versus the current leader in terms of overall consumer mind share, which is AWS. And we know last quarter, this was a major driver of Google growth. I think that cloud revenue grew by about 32% year over year. And when we look at our forward-looking demand, we see those figures up by nearly 30% year over year. So at least on our end, we definitely see some, on our end, we see cloud and AI as two big growth drivers for Google. And that chart that you were just explaining really shows why. It shows how Google is kind of pulling away from the pack, at least in forward-looking consumer momentum. We know that last quarter, this was a big driver of Google revenue. I think that, Google Cloud revenue was up by about 32% year over year. And we see this pace keeping up. We're right on track with that. And so for us, we continue to see this as a growth driver. But as you mentioned, there are some vulnerabilities. Search is a big area that we're watching. Just when it comes to, overall consumer behavior shifts, we're watching, and we do see signs of shifting consumer behavior when it comes to people finding information, especially younger consumers who may be more inclined to go search on that AI app versus use a traditional Google search. We're also seeing some signs of, rising zero-click searches. And so for a company like Google, or Alphabet, I should say, where, the bulk of revenue is coming from the search ads, if you have fewer consumers who are actually clicking on those ads, that could spell bad news in the long run. As you mentioned, we haven't necessarily seen that come to fruition yet, at least in the minds of investors, but that's certainly something on our radar that we're monitoring to see if we do start to see some changes in how advertising dollars are allocated.
Yep. And then, you look at Chrome. I saw you guys have one chart on Chrome. I mean, this is blowing my mind here over the last couple of years, the year over year market share growth for Chrome. Is this really happening, Megan? What's going on?
I thought that this was an interesting chart just to show Google's dominance. We talked about the search vulnerability, but you can see just the massive scale of users here who are, leveraging Chrome. Second place here is Safari. And I think what's interesting to note about that is if you're a mobile user, if you're Apple, and I know you guys were talking about Apple in the last segment, if you search a query in the search bar of Safari, it defaults to Google search, right? And so I think that that's a big proponent of consumers just naturally being funneled into Google's infrastructure, that search infrastructure, which right now is its major driver of revenue. And so this just shows its continued expansion. But some of this, depending on how Apple moves forward with some of its own AI partnerships and integrations, it could work in Google's favor or out of Google's favor if it partners with a company like, say, a Perplexity. So definitely some vulnerabilities that we're watching in Google, but also, at least on our demand front and on the consumer front, we see continued momentum in its cloud platform. And we're also watching some momentum in its YouTube exposure, especially YouTube TV with live sports and football launching this weekend. This is another growth driver for Google long term.
And they just signed that major deal with Meta Platforms, $10 billion also. So it might be about partnerships, maybe a white glove there on the DOJ as far as coming down on them also, because I don't think the expectations are that they're going to have to divest Chrome at this point. So we'll have to wait and see. Great stuff, great data as always, Megan. Enjoy your holiday weekend.